Welcome to the history and evolution of the MMORPG genre, Part 1, Beginnings and Evolution. The literal definition of an MMORPG is as follows. Any story-driven online video game in which a player, taking on the persona of a character in a virtual or fantasy world, interacts with a large number of other players. In this 4-part series, I will be looking into this genre in depth to find out where it started, where it is now, and where it is going in the future. Along the way, I also hope to find out what about this genre has attracted people to it and why that is. I have been playing Final Fantasy XIV, another MMORPG that I covered in depth a little while ago. The link on that is in the description, for over 5 years at this point, so I am excited to dive into this genre along with you. Let's start with where it all began. I think there was some idea what we were doing was special, but I don't believe any of us had being a pioneer as an original goal. We just wanted to work on a cool game for the players. A quote from Brian Psychochild Green, one of the developers of Meridian 59. Meridian 59 didn't start with the idea of being the first MMORPG. It was the dream of two brothers, Andrew and Chris Chrismay, to try and turn the MUDs, or MUDs, that they loved into a game that the player could actually see. MUDs are a type of RPG computer game. Imagine playing D&D on the internet, but all you see is text descriptions. The brothers would eventually be joined by other developers to create their company called Archetype Interactive. The game was touted as a 3D game, and this is mostly true. If you look on screen, you see how the sprite of that character and the flag appear to be 3D. But the closer you get to them, the more you see that the actual animated sprites, like this spider, are actually 2D with multiple different angles drawn, so that when you walk around them, they seem to rotate. The environment is fully 3D, but the sprites and interactive objects are usually 2D. This is commonly known as 2.5D perspective. I should point out a quick disclaimer. I will be playing these games as they are available now. These games have had years, in some cases, of patches and improvements. I just see it as giving each game a chance to put its best foot forward. Alright, let's see what standards this game set when it was released in 1996. According to an interview from MassivelyOverpowered.com, upon entering the game, players could create a customized human avatar, after which they set out to seek fame and fortune, and probably death. Meridian 59 was a skill-based, allowing players to level up 7 schools of skills independently. Hit points were gained by beating up weaker monsters, and your mana pool could only be expanded by exploring the world to discover special mana nodes. And there were quests to accomplish and factions to join, although PvP quickly became one of the title's biggest features. Wars were raged over guild halls and servers, and if one player got too out of control, a player justice system could be used to rein him or her in. As one of the creators, Andrew Chrismay, put it, as much as possible, we would have Meridian's players run the game themselves as opposed to trying to script out their experience. This is still definitely true. Nowadays, when we begin the game after creating our character, we are given a short tutorial that explains basic commands and introduces us to the basic mechanics of the game. There's no real story or motivation for our character. You walk around, talk to a few people, and kill some skeletons. There is a portion of the first dungeon that encourages players to work together. There are 2 levers to open the last room in the mausoleum where you have been kicking skeleton butt. The idea is that 2 players would pull those levers at the same time to then tackle the last room together. Apparently, it is possible to do this alone, but I was unable to do it. This isn't necessary to complete the prologue, though, as at any point the player can go through the portal to leave the tutorial to enter Meridian proper. Now let's look into my first impressions of the controls and the UI based on this screenshot here. You're introduced with this whole screen that shows what your player is looking at. If you have a weapon equipped, you see it on your right side, like we see my mace. On your left, you can equip a shield or other things. You can't actually see your character, although other characters can see you. The actual screen looks great and the colors are very vibrant. If you press the C key on your keyboard, it actually equips the camera to your mouse. I don't know if this was an original feature or something added in, but it's very smooth, as you can see from the footage I've been playing earlier. Attacking in battle is also extremely easy. All you really have to do is get close to your enemy and press the E key, and you'll attack with whatever your primary weapon is. You can use spells if you choose to cast them, but as I was playing a warrior class, I never really got into the spells. Off to the right of the screen, you can actually see the map. The map fills in as you're walking around these areas and then stays filled in when you come back. While it just looks like a bunch of lines, there are red and blue dots to represent enemies and yourself respectively. It's not the worst map that I've seen in an MMORPG. EverQuest 1 still takes that title. Below that is the item box. This will show you, depending on which tab you're in, your skills, your stats, or what items you have in your chest. Along the bottom of the screen, you can also see the chat log. This will become a standard for all MMORPGs to have a chat log on screen, although most ones subsequently will have the chat actually overlaid on the screen rather than under it. In this screen, you can see yourself talking to other NPCs, NPCs talking to you, and other players talking to you, as well as messages from combat, like if you're actually hitting your target and how your target looks. There wasn't actually any health for these enemies. The screen would just tell you how injured they look, going from slightly injured to greatly injured to near death before actually being dead and being able to be looted. Speaking of death, this MMORPG actually had a feature that wasn't used in a lot of subsequent games, and that was a penalty for dying. If you died in the overworld and not a town or a safe space, you would lose all of your inventory and you'd have to go back and find it, although enemies or other players could loot your corpse before you got back there. Dying could also lead in a lowering of your stats. The only other MMORPG that I've discovered that does this is Final Fantasy XI, where dying would mean that you could lose so much experience that you actually went down a level rather than progressing. As I said before, there really is no direction in this game. You kind of decide whatever your adventure is going to be for yourself. And to illustrate that, I'll share the story of my first adventure in Meridian 59. After leaving the tutorial area, I appeared in what I would come to find out was a town called Jasper. I tried to talk to some NPCs to see if they had any quests for me. This is one aspect of the game that bothered me. Most of the NPCs need very specific prompts to give you a response back. When I didn't know what these prompts were, I obviously didn't find anything, so I just started wandering around exploring the different houses. I ended up finding a portal in the back of what I believe was a guild hall, and that took me to a forest, and I couldn't go back through the portal. After exploring this forest for a little bit, I discovered a shrine to the man I quoted earlier, Brian Psychochild Green, who died on August 6th of 2020. He was one of the last developers that worked on the original project and was one of the few people to still keep the game up and running today. After continuing to work my way through the forest, I actually discovered a temple in the middle of it. For what it's worth, I will say I really like the design of the temple. Eventually, I was able to find my way out of the forest and into the town of Meridian, which has become my character's home. All of this happened without the game telling me to do anything. I was lost and ended up doing some research online and talking to people in-game. This made me realize what this game is mainly about. at least on the gameplay aspect, and that's grinding. What I mean is that improving your stats unlocks more gameplay as your character improves, and you improve your stats mainly by fighting monsters, like that spider I just killed. After talking to a fellow player, I was given a new goal: improve my health to at least 30 hit points and learn a few new skills from a trainer in another town. It's not a complicated game at the end of the day, but it sets certain standards for the genre going forward. First, let's look at what the difference is from an RPG and an MMORPG, as according to the Routledge Companion to Video Game Studies. The RPG player will often have a choice about the kind of protagonist he or she will play, whether an anonymous customizable avatar or the narrative's preset main character, such as Cloud Strife in Final Fantasy VII from Squaresoft in 1997. Either way, they will acquire experience points enabling specialist skills as they move through the game, which we did see some of this in Meridian 59. But there is a distinction that is described later in the book. Perhaps the main difference in terms of role-playing is that the multiplayer world precludes the possibility of the player taking on a central identified role in a core narrative. Whereas in Final Fantasy VII, we assume the identity of the hero, with a team of named allies. In an MMORPG such as EverQuest, all the millions of players worldwide are each the hero of his or her own story, and so are anonymous in relation to the overarching narrative that MMORPGs typically superimpose. So according to that, an MMORPG must make everyone the hero of their own story, as well as improving the player's avatar through upgrading their stats in some way. Now let's look how an MMORPG is described by MMO.com. First, MMOs typically have persistent worlds, allowing players to interact in real time. But in some cases, other MMOs employ instance worlds. Players join a central hub and then branch out to zones. Each area is not connected but exists independently from the rest, such as in the Secret World, so that players must load each zone. Although many open-world games also rely on instance zones for dungeons, PvP, battlegrounds, and specialized areas for other events, so that many MMOs end up with a melange of both persistent and instance worlds. Outside of the world, MMOs are also defined by: oftentimes, an MMO has a virtual economy, where players trade in-game goods, and character customization has also become a hallmark of MMOs, the option to create a distinct avatar. And finally, player interaction is a core element of any MMO. Alright, to sum that up, an MMORPG must have the ability to make everyone feel like a hero, a system to improve the player character stats, a persistent or instance-based world that allows players to interact in real time, a player-run economy, character customization, and player interaction. Personally, I think that there are a few things that I believe that these games should have that are stereotypical of the genre. Dungeons or some sort of PvE content, PvE meaning player versus environment, PvP meaning player versus player, and difficult, unique enemies or bosses, and an endgame. To make all that a bit more succinct, I have created a list or system of the things that MMORPGs must have, called the KEDBQ system. This has 7 sections in which I believe any true MMORPG should be able to fit into. The sections are character, how does the game allow player to customize their avatar, and how does the game make them feel immersed? Economy, is there a player-driven economy? Dungeons, what is the PvE content? Bosses, are there unique enemies that provide extra challenges and experiences? Competition, what is the PvP content? Endgame, what is there to do after hitting level cap? And world, how is the world set up? Now let's see how Meridian 59 fits into this. First we have character. Players can choose what kind of human they want to be. You can customize your gender, skin color, hairstyle, hair color, eye color, nose style, and mouth style. You can also choose your starting stats, a few simple spells or skills that you can use to level up. As far as immersion, the game allows you to create your own story, so it falls to the player to how they feel playing the game. As far as economy goes, there really isn't one. You can trade with other players and sell to merchants, but there isn't a game-wide board you can buy stuff off of. Now, dungeons. There are places around the world that can only be entered if the character is the proper level and has found the way to unlock them. Like this mausoleum in front of us on the screen. This is actually one of the beginner dungeons for Meridian 59, but I wasn't able to find a way of unlocking it. It is not required to be tackled as a group, but it is way easier. Besides that, you mostly have fighting enemies around the world as your PvE content. For bosses, there are unique enemies, but they don't have a lot of emphasis put on them. Some enemies are a different shade than their counterparts and are technically bosses, but besides a larger health pool, they don't really have anything special about them. The end game of Meridian 59 seems to be mostly PvP and grinding better skills, or just grinding for certain items. There isn't any special raids or anything to do once you hit level cap, if there even is one. The world is an instance-based one with the areas connected by loading screens. Like you just saw as I entered this town, there was a slight stutter. Back in the day, there probably would have been a loading screen there, but as with the internet getting faster and the game being so simple, there really isn't much to load in these games anymore. Basically, each area, such as this town or the area outside it where I was fighting monsters, is its own area that is connected to the other ones, and once there's someone in it, it loads. Meridian 59 is a lot of fun to play, and it's still open today, although there are only 2 servers, the 101 server and the 102 server. I don't really know if there's any difference in between them. The next game we'll be covering will be EverQuest 2, but that will be in its own video, a part 1 section 2 if you will. All sources that I quoted in this video will be linked down in the description if you're curious. Thank you for watching this, please subscribe and I'll see you later. Goodbye.